Welcome to the WNCT Podcast Network.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
It is a crisis that strikes at the very heart and soul and spirit of our national will.
People have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to this episode of What the Politics. I have Emily with me and a recurring guest, Dr. Peter Francia from ECU. And so today's topic is going to be about current events. But before we get into our topic, there is a video element to this podcast recording. If you're listening to this, you can watch the video element at WNCT.com. So now let's get right into our topic, current events. We left Afghanistan, troops left Afghanistan, United States left Afghanistan officially last night, which would be August 30th here in the States, but then that would meet the Tuesday deadline for people in Afghanistan. Let's start off with, how did we get there? Why did we end up there? Dr. Peter Francia, if you can kind of give us a little insight into why we were there in the first place.
Well, let me begin by thanking you for having me on. It's always a pleasure to talk to both you and Emily. Always enjoy these podcasts. So to answer your question, how did the United States get involved in Afghanistan? Well, the answer is pretty straightforward. The September 11th attacks in 2001 triggered U.S. involvement in Afghanistan. The terrorist attacks were not launched specifically by the country of Afghanistan, but terrorists were training in Afghanistan. And that was a factor in it. Osama bin Laden was also reportedly in Afghanistan, and the United States, after the 9/11 attacks, made it a mission to capture and as it turned out, kill Osama bin Laden. So the September 11 terrorist attacks is the straightforward answer to your question. That's why we got involved in Afghanistan.
Definitely. And then kind of talking about, where we are now, a lot of people are kind of throwing the word blame around, throwing blame at possibly former President Donald Trump, President Biden. Is there someone to blame for the situation we're in now, or is blame the wrong word to use entirely?
Yeah, I think that you can certainly find criticism of the evacuation in Afghanistan. That might be a little bit different than using the word blame. But certainly there's been criticism actually from Democrats in Congress and from, even allies. Tony Blair, who's was a member of the Labor Party, left of center political party, was critical of the withdrawal process led by President Biden. So there have been pretty widespread criticisms of the withdrawal process, the evacuation that's been going on in Afghanistan. If we're going to go back beyond that, you could certainly look at past presidents and talk about their role in creating the Afghanistan situation that, of course, President Biden inherited. But if we're talking about at least in the immediate, and I think that's really more the direction where your question was headed, then certainly, as Joe Biden put it, the buck stops here. And the most charitable way to put it. I think you could use stronger words than that. But Biden had initially promised an orderly withdrawal process, and I think some of the images that came out over the past week or so indicate otherwise.
My question is, why didn't the war end? Why didn't we send troops, home out of Afghanistan after Osama bin Laden was killed?
I think that's a very good question, and some people have raised that if of course, the stated goal was to capture and even kill Osama bin Laden, and so once that was accomplished, one could certainly make the argument that was an opportunity for the United States to begin its process of leaving Afghanistan. Why we didn't is really a question for former President Barack Obama to answer. You could also ask President Trump, who came after President Obama, and raise that question to him. Well, why was the United States still there? So I think if we're going to go beyond, look past beyond the immediate situation and ask the question that you did, which is why were we still there after Osama bin Laden was captured and killed? I think that's a fair question, and we would have to ask former presidents Obama and Trump the answer to that.
And I'm kind of wondering, I'm sure that there's some Americans obviously very upset about this. Why did we stay? Why did we use resources, spend money, use the lives of our service members? I'm sure there's a lot of people upset about why we didn't leave earlier. So, what do you think is their sentiment behind that? What do you think is, I guess, really, I don't know how to phrase this question the way I'm trying to. I guess, where's their anger really stemming from? Do you think it's a justified anger?
Well, before I answer that specific question, let's again remember one of the chief goal in entering militarily was the bin Laden capture, and that was accomplished. So I think anybody that would say that lives were lost needlessly are forgetting that important point. So there was a military objective that was accomplished, and I think that's important to remember. I think the fact that the Taliban is back in power, remember that was the government that the United States toppled when we first went into Afghanistan. The fact that the Taliban is back in charge of Afghanistan, certainly you can understand why some people would feel because of that, that much of the sacrifice that went into this, both in lives lost and of course, tremendous amount of money that was spent by the United States in training what is now the former Afghan government and supplying weaponry to that government. All of that has been lost, and the Taliban is back in power. So certainly from that side of things, I think one could look at it and understand why there would be frustration.
So the Taliban, while they were in power, now they've regained power. First of all, who are they, and are they someone that the United States would consider an enemy, and why?
Well, they were definitely the enemy of the United States after the 9/11 attacks, but the politics in Afghanistan has grown, it's become a lot messier over the last 20 years. You have a much more extreme terrorist organization, ISIS-K, operating in Afghanistan, and ISIS-K is more extreme than the Taliban. And at this point, those are the two major forces that are fighting it out now in Afghanistan. And given those two options, the Taliban is the more moderate faction of those two. So in 20 years, a lot has changed. I don't think that we would say that the Taliban is an ally of the United States, although it is worth noting that many of the Afghan fighters who would call themselves part of the Taliban today were allies of the United States in the 1980s when the United States was aiding Afghan rebels in their fight against the Soviet Union in the 1980s. So the politics of this region have been messy and complicated going back more than 20 years. We could go all the way back to the 1980s when the United States was covertly aiding Afghan rebels in their fight against the Soviet Union and communism.
Messing up my mic again with my mute button, sorry. So what direction are politics headed in Afghanistan now that the Taliban has, risen up into power? What direction is their politics headed in? Because I look at this as, I'm scared for women in that country. You've already seen reports of women being beaten in the street for not wearing their head coverings. You've seen multiple business owners out trying to cover up posters with paint of women with makeup on and things like that. So, what do you think? What direction is this headed in?
Well, the Taliban government has been under pressure from other governments. Turkey, for example, a NATO member and an ally of the United States, has been putting at least public statements out for more respect for women's rights in Afghanistan. Couldn't tell you how much impact that's going to have, but the new government is going to be under some pressure from countries from all around that region and around the world to improve its record on women's rights. If you're asking my opinion on this, and I should preface by saying, both of you know this, my area of expertise lies more in public opinion and in American elections than it does in foreign policy. But based on the track record, certainly of the previous Taliban government, it certainly is cause for great concern for those who are, for anyone concerned about the rights of women in that region.
And I think kind of prefacing your area of expertise is a perfect segue to get into what's happening here in the United States. And especially here in North Carolina, we have a Senate election happening in 2022. And there's a lot of people are mad at their elected officials at the party in power, which currently is the Biden administration, Democrats, and then Governor Roy Cooper, Democrat. So how are these developments looking for, specifically, at least in North Carolina, for the elected offices coming up?
Okay, well, definitely a topic I can speak with a bit more authority on. Midterm elections have, going all the way back to the presidency of Franklin Roosevelt, midterm elections have always been kind to the party that's out of the White House. So there have been a few exceptions to this. 2002, for example, was one. The Republican Party actually picked up seats in the midterm, even though George W. Bush, a Republican, occupied the White House. One of the few rare exceptions to that rule. 1998, Bill Clinton was in his second term, but it was a midterm election, and we saw the Democrats pick up seats in the House of Representatives. Those tend to be rare events when the president's party picks up seats. So just from a historical perspective, forget everything that's happening right now. If you were just looking at things from a historical perspective, you would look at the situation and say that the Republicans have a very, very good chance of winning back majority control in both the House and the Senate. Of course, the Democrats' margin is as thin as it could possibly be in the Senate. The Vice President, Kamala Harris, currently breaks any tie votes, and the Senate is divided 50-50. So the Democrats get the 51st vote only because they have the presidency and they have the vice president there to break the tie. House of Representatives was a bit of a surprise in the last election. Democrats were confident that they were going to gain seats and add to their majority, and that did not happen. Republicans actually picked up seats despite Joe Biden winning the election. Usually it doesn't happen that way, that there are coattail effects. And when there are coattail effects, the president's party in a presidential election year, they tend to win seats. So if, with Biden's victory, the expectation certainly heading into the election was that Democrats would pick up seats in the House of Representatives. It's strange when that doesn't happen, but it did not in 2020. And that narrowed the Democrats' advantage in the House to a very, very slim majority. So Republicans enter in 2022 with a real opportunity to cut into that slimmed Democratic majority and to overtake it in 2022. And so there's a real chance, a very real chance, that Republicans will be in the majority after the midterms in both the House and the Senate.
You already, you told us you do a lot of public policy or public opinion, and public surveys as well. So have you done anything kind of up to this point about the 2020 midterm election and gotten any thoughts from people about, what they're kind of thinking about this?
Well, it's too early right now to be polling the 2022 elections. This is a little removed from your question, but the Center for Survey Research at ECU will be getting involved in the Virginia gubernatorial election shortly after Labor Day. So we'll be back in the field as a center. That's a little bit different, though, than what we've been talking about. But Virginia and New Jersey are two states that have gubernatorial elections in an odd numbered year, which is typically a bit strange. We usually do our elections in even numbered years, but there are sometimes places where you have local races in odd numbered years. And in the case of New Jersey and Virginia, they do their gubernatorial elections in odd numbered years. The Virginia gubernatorial race is not far from North Carolina, of course, and it's potentially a close one, at least based on some of the polls that are out there currently. So we're gonna dip our toes into those waters soon enough.
And there's a special recall election for Governor Gavin Newsom, and
yeah, that's a good one. I'm glad that's a good one to bring up. That's right. And that again, we haven't done any work at our center about it, but there has been pretty extensive. There's been a lot of polling on it, and yes, the recall process in California is a very strange one. There is a sort of an up or down vote on Gavin Newsom, and if the vote is down, then it's the candidate with, and there are just literally a ton of them on the ballot in California. A simple plurality wins. The candidate with the most votes would become the next governor. And the last time that happened, Arnold Schwarzenegger was elected governor in California. Again, we're going back about 2 decades or so now to that election. But that's how Arnold Schwarzenegger got into the governor's mansion in California. The same process would apply here, and Republicans have a shot at winning the governor's mansion in California. That I think most political observers would tell you would be almost impossible in a typical election year. So this is, certainly stay tuned. California, the most populous state in the union. And there is also an 88-year-old senator, Dianne Feinstein. And if anything, if she were to die in office, and certainly no one's wishing for that to happen, but at 88, it's something that some people have discussed. Or if she were unable to finish the end of her term, then a Republican in California, if they were to win the governor's mansion, would be able to appoint the next senator. And a Republican governor is going to pick a Republican for that Senate seat. Now, that's significant because I mentioned earlier, the Senate is 50-50 right now. And if you take one Democrat away and put a Republican in, you don't have to have a PhD in math to figure that out. That would be 51-49 advantage for the Republicans. And all of a sudden, just like that, without even the 2022 elections happening, the Republicans would be in charge of the Senate. So California is significant in a number of ways. So keep an eye on that. It has national implications.
Definitely. And when it comes to these 2022 midterm elections, obviously the pandemic is going to be a hot button issue. I think this withdrawal from Afghanistan is going to be a hot button issue. Is there another one that really sticks out in your mind that you think that American voters are going to be focusing on for this election?
Yeah, you mentioned the pandemic and the war in Afghanistan as the top two. I think that those will certainly be among the top two. I think related to the pandemic is the economy. So it's sometimes a bit hard to separate those two because the response to the pandemic obviously has an impact on the economy. So in some sense, that issue is the economy and the pandemic are tied together. But of course, the pandemic also is an issue about public health, and that makes it a bit different than just talking about the economy. But keep an eye on where the stock market is headed. Keep an eye on the unemployment rate. Those are obviously indicators that will suggest how the economy is doing. And if people are upbeat about the economy, that there's mountains of research that suggests that does matter to voters. So if economic numbers are in good shape, that could certainly help the Democrats because it tends to help the party that controls the White House. But if the economy were to dip before the November elections, that could spell real doom for Democrats. You could be talking about really big Republican gains in both the House and the Senate if that were to happen, because the Democrats are swimming upstream as it is. And the reason for that, as I mentioned, are those historical lessons that the party of the president always historically does poorly in the midterms. It's really a question of how poorly. And again, if the economy is in strong shape, then I think the losses that the Democrats suffer in the midterms will be small. But if the economy were to dip and we were to be in a bad situation in 2022, then Republicans are likely to win a whole lot of seats.
just off the top of your head, Governor Roy Cooper's popularity among North Carolinians, and then the two Republican senators' popularity among people here in North Carolina. Does one? Because I know Governor Cooper's popularity appears to be declining. I'm not sure how the Republican senators' popularity rating is among the people here in North Carolina, but do you think that the Republican Party is definitely more favorable at this moment, and those senators are definitely more favorable than the Democratic Party?
Well, North Carolina, at least recently, you had the 2008 election where Democrats did surprisingly well. And I say surprisingly well in 2008 because of past history that Barack Obama carried the state in 2008, first Democrat to do so since Jimmy Carter in 1976. Kay Hagan, I think if you had told people 6 months before the 2008 election that Kay Hagan was going to beat Elizabeth Dole, people would have told you were crazy. And she won that election and won by quite a bit. So in 2008, if you were a political observer looking at North Carolina, you would be looking at it and saying, wow, there's something really profound happening. And the Democrats are in a position to really make some serious inroads in North Carolina in the years to come. Well, that has not happened. 2010 was a big year for Republicans nationwide, but also in North Carolina. And really in every election since statewide, Republicans have outperformed Democrats. The lone exception to that has been Roy Cooper, who's been able to win two elections, running for governor in the state. But if you look at the Senate contests since Kay Hagan's victory, the Republicans have been successful in defending both Senate seats and in unseating the seat that Kay Hagan held before that, and then since then defending those seats. So if you look at at least the big high profile Senate races where Democrats poured a lot of money, and there were pretty high expectations among a lot of Democrats in 2020, Cal Cunningham was favored. If you asked most pundits heading into election night in 2020, even despite the scandal that had enveloped his campaign, many still thought that he was going to hang on and win. And of course, Tom Tillis pulled out the victory and surprised some of the experts there. And I bring all of that history up just to suggest that, North Carolina is still a state that is more favorable than not to Republicans. And while Roy Cooper has been able to win as a Democrat, despite the facts that I just mentioned, when Roy Cooper's not on the ballot, and we're looking at a gubernatorial contest, involving a different Democrat against just about any, serious Republican, you would have to say that there's an edge for Republicans in that type of generic matchup.
And Victoria, I don't know if you have any more questions about the 2022 races, but I wanted to kind of circle back to Afghanistan, if that was okay with you guys.
One quick addition to one last thing on that race that I wanted to mention that I think is important. It's very hard to speculate when we don't know who the nominees are yet. So circle back to me on who's going to win the governor's mansion in North Carolina when we know who the nominees are. The candidates do matter in looking at these elections. And so to sort of talk about it in a very generic sense right now is a bit hard to do. But again, I would say the conditions are more favorable than not in a generic matchup for Republicans right now.
Okay, so circling back to kind of our previous topic of conversation, I had a few more questions about this. And obviously a lot of this is kind of more guessing and speculation because we don't know what's going to happen in Afghanistan. But I'm curious to know, there's still, they call it the low hundreds. They say there's low hundreds of Americans still in Afghanistan, but, there's been lists sent over of people that they need to still evacuate that are American citizens. But how likely is that those American citizens are going to be able to safely get out of Afghanistan with this period gone?
I have no way of knowing the answer to that. Certainly the Biden administration will be working very hard diplomatically with the Taliban government to ensure their safe travel back to the United States. Obviously, if that doesn't happen for any reason, it will be quite a big news story and it'd be very damaging politically to the Biden administration. to say nothing of the fact that it would be a horrific tragedy as well, if anything, if any harm were to be done to American citizens who have not been able to leave the country yet. So we'll see what happens, but I really don't know enough about, and I think it would be hard, you'd be hard pressed to get a good answer from that, even from the people who are very close to that situation, where they could say with any certainty what's going to happen.
And this will be my last question. This is about our vice president. Her popularity also appears to be declining. I'm not sure when there was a lot of hope at the beginning of the presidency that she would be more left than Biden himself. And I'm not sure exact. Can I just give us an update on how she's doing and how her popularity is and what her future seems to be for the next?
Well, I would say this about any vice president, whether it's Kamala Harris, whether it's we could go back and talk about virtually any vice president from the beginning of public opinion research and polling. And we know that the popularity of the vice president is always tied to the popularity of the president. And Joe Biden's numbers have declined quite a bit over the past month, but certainly since the withdrawal from Afghanistan, we've seen some movement where Biden's disapproval numbers, at least the last time I looked, which was yesterday, Biden's disapproval numbers now are slightly higher than his approval numbers. If you look at the averages across the different polls that are out there, 538.com offers those numbers, and disapproval was slightly higher than approval, and that marks a pretty significant change from where Biden's numbers were in the early part of the summer. In the early part of the summer, Biden's approval numbers were ahead of his disapproval numbers, in the neighborhood of about 10 percentage points or so. I'm sort of rounding there, but he was above water, and now disapproval has creeped up above. And I mention all of that because Kamala Harris's popularity is entwined with Joe Biden's presidency. So if you look at Biden's numbers and you see them dropping, you can almost rest assured that the approval numbers for the vice president are going to drop with that. I don't think that there's anything that Harris has done specifically that I could point to say that it's something unique to Vice President Harris. I think that what you're seeing in terms of her drop is more tied to Joe Biden's presidency.
Sure. Well, I think that was all the questions that we had for you today. We really appreciate you taking this time out of your day to speak with us, Dr. Francie, about these topics, these current events. And for those of you guys who are listening or watching on our release date, President Biden is expected to give an address to the nation regarding the Afghanistan withdrawal and the situation going there. So please feel free to check that out later on in the day. And of course, you can always find WNCT or What the Politics, at WNCT.com under our features tab on the WNCT Podcast Network. Of course, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever else you guys listen to your podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see y'all next time.